leak. I mean, it's extraordinary. And now you've been caught red-handed because you thought that the rest of us wouldn't find out. And what we now know is our own intelligence agencies at the same time were concluding and briefing members of Congress that it likely was from a lab leak. 2020, is it normal for scientists who are supposedly doing independent research to get together and talk about how their conclusions are going to come out? Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of the witnesses for being here. Dr. Wolinitz, if I could start with you. You served as the chief of staff to Francis Collins for 4 years, is that right?
That's correct, Senator.
From 2017 to 2021, is that correct?
Yes, that's
correct.
So
right through the heart of the pandemic.
Yes.
I noticed that Dr. Collins was intensely interested in discrediting the lab leak. I guess we'll call it a hypothesis. I think it's probably a little bit stronger than that now that we know something of what our intelligence agencies have long assessed. Last month, I had the chance to speak with Dr. Robert Gary, who sat right where you are, who co-authored that really, frankly, shameless propaganda piece, the Proximal Origin paper, which infamously stated that the SARS-CoV-2 is not a laboratory construct or a purposely manipulated virus. It went on to say it could not possibly have come from a lab. This, of course, we now know is not what multiple U.S. intelligence agencies assessed. What interests me is that your office was very involved in that paper, which was supposed to be an independent piece of scientific analysis, but Dr. Collins actually called Dr. Gary when he was supposedly working on the paper on February 1st, 2020. Is it normal for scientists who are supposedly doing independent research to get together and talk about how their conclusions are going to come out?
Thank you for the question, Senator Hawley. I think in general, yes, it is quite common for scientists across biomedical research fields, while they're in the process of doing research, to discuss with colleagues and other scientists. I do not believe that that is an accurate description of the conversations that took place.
Well, tell us, what were the nature of the conversations?
So while I was not present for those conversations, my understanding based on readouts is there was a lot of interest in the origins and current understanding of SARS-CoV-2. And I think it's important when we're talking about the term lab leak theory to differentiate between the idea of a virus escaping from a lab, which is a biosafety violation, versus a virus that is engineered or manipulated in the lab and then escapes.
Yeah, and your boss and Dr. Fauci tried to discredit both of those things. They said that the lab was absolutely not involved. We know that at the time that this paper was supposedly being written, because we now have the private correspondence from Dr. Fauci, your boss said that it was a very destructive conspiracy to think that there was a lab involved. So he's on the phone with a scientist, quote-unquote scientist, who's supposedly writing an independent paper. By the way, Dr. Gary testified under oath that he was coming to his conclusions while this paper was being written. He was discovering the answers. But we now know that your boss was on the phone with him saying this is a very destructive conspiracy before the paper was even written. My question is, why was your office so intent on pushing to the public the idea that this could not possibly have been a lab issue? Is it because of the NIH's role in funding gain-of-function research at the lab? Is that the reason why?
So, Senator Hawley, I would say that in the event of any new and emerging infectious disease, if you've ever gone through a tabletop exercise in biosecurity.
Yeah. Answer my question. Is it because that NIH was actually helping to fund, EcoHealth was funding gain-of-function research?
No, I believe that's an inaccurate assessment.
In fact, your boss misled Congress and testified falsely that NIH and the EcoHealth had never conducted gain-of-function research at Wuhan, correct?
No, that's incorrect.
He did testify that.
I believe, sir, that what he testified to was that there was no evidence at that time that NIH was funding research that met the scope of the P3CO policy, which I want to differentiate from the term gain-of-function research.
Oh, of course, this is the classic. This is the classic. Now that we've lied, now that you have, and your office lied to the American people for years, told the American people that a lab leak was a very destructive conspiracy. That's your boss's statement while you were his chief of staff. Of course, we now know that that was the conspiracy to hide this from the American people, to censor people who went out and said, you know what, actually, maybe this is a lab leak. Your office, Dr. Fauci and others, tried to actively censor them. There was a propaganda effort that this paper was the center of, and now everybody says, oh well, we just weren't sure at the time. We didn't really know. You knew exactly what you were doing. You were actively misleading the American people the entire time. Get this, after that paper, it's really an opinion piece, was published, your boss then says to Dr. Fauci that he had really hoped that the paper would settle this. Is there anything more that we can do to shut down this destructive conspiracy? This is in April of 2020. And then Dr. Fauci went to the White House podium and said that absolutely there's no way that this could have come from a lab. Let me come back to my original question. Why was your office so intent on shutting down any talk about this being involved with a lab? Why? I don't understand it. Why the hysteria?
So, Senator Hawley, I will say that my understanding of the situation is that no one at NIH, including Dr. Collins, Dr. Fauci, myself, ever suggested that there wasn't the possibility that a virus had escaped from a lab.
Oh, that's ridiculous. Let me just stop you right there. I cannot have these lies just continue to be told over and over again. Sorry, and wrong. That's false. You people repeatedly said it could not have come from a lab. Your boss said it was a very destructive conspiracy. Not that it was unlikely, not that it was not the best idea, a conspiracy. And based on that, you censored, and your administration that you worked for actively censored scientists, journalists, and what we now know is our own intelligence agencies at the same time were concluding and briefing members of Congress that it likely was from a lab leak. I mean, it's extraordinary. And now you've been caught red-handed because you thought that the rest of us wouldn't find out. You thought that the public would always be kept in the dark. And as it turns out, we now know these emails have become public that you were pushing this propaganda effort and yet claiming the mantle of science. Don't you see that what you have done has set back the respectability and integrity of science by generations? You were acting as propagandists. Do you regret your role in any of this?
So, Senator Hawley, I don't think you've characterized
Do you
my
regret your role in
of
any of the
NIH.
misleading of the public? Do you regret your role in your office saying that a lab nexus here is a very destructive conspiracy? Do you regret your role in helping censor millions of Americans who were kicked off social media, who were disciplined at work for saying that maybe a lab was involved, which we now know the FBI thinks is the case? Do you regret it?
I do not believe I ever had the role that you're describing.
Do you regret anything that you did during this period? Do you regret not speaking out? Do you regret not advising your boss to temper his comments? Do you regret not opposing the censorship? Do you regret it? You're in a position of tremendous influence.
I do not believe censorship took place, sir.
You don't believe censorship took place?
I do not.
What world are you living in? Tell that to the scientists who basically lost their credentials. Tell that to the people who were kicked off of social media and banned because they asked about a lab leak. You don't believe censorship took place? The privilege is astounding. You were the chief of staff at the NIH pushing these conspiracies, pushing the effort to shut down Americans, and now you have the gall to sit here and say censorship never took place. I mean, it's unbelievable. Senator. Unbelievable.
Senator.
I cannot believe that that's your testimony. And frankly, I can't believe you have the gall to sit here and say that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Senator Peters, may I have a chance to expand on my comments for a moment?
If you could be brief, please. We have other questions.
Yes, thank you. I think I want to make it very clear that I certainly, and I do believe this is true of others at NIH as well, including Dr. Collins and Dr. Fauci, have never dismissed that the potential origins of SARS-CoV-2 leading to the COVID-19 pandemic are known, that there is that we just don't have the evidence to be able to make a determination.
That's not what the paper said. The paper said it couldn't have come from a lab. It could not have come from a lab. Your boss said it was a very destructive conspiracy. But I
please let her.
I'd like to go forward with my questions, please.